This is the On Blast podcast. As always, my name is Sheldon Alexander. We're back to do this again. A little NFL picks edition of the On Blast podcast. And I'm back with the week one picks. And of course, there's only one man that I could really do this with. I couldn't really say that I was doing a picks pod for the NFL, not have my guy, Mr. Matt Russell, joining me on the show. My dude, how you doing, man? How you feeling?
Man, we are on NFL, depending on when you're listening to this, we are on NFL season's eve here. You know, everybody does the like, oh, Christmas Eve. Oh, it's just like that. Honestly, like, I wish I could disagree. I'm really excited, man. I've said goodbye to my family for 6 months. Like, we had a good run. Took the wife-to-be to a Pearl Jam concert last night and rocked it out. Honestly, once midnight hit, it was okay. Well, I'll see you, sometime around February, and we'll get married a couple months after that. But yeah, man, fired up to be here. We weren't sure necessarily we were going to get this thing back on the air, but I'm excited to talk a little NFL football with you this season.
Hold on. As long as there's an NFL season, the people are going to want their picks, and we are going to deliver them their picks. And for people who have been along with us in different iterations of what we do here, welcome back. For people who might be brand new, just a little heads up of what we do here. I'll come in, I'll tell you the line, I'll give you, my thoughts, which is normally the Joe Public take of what I think is going to happen, or what I think should happen, where I'm leaning. And then my guy, Mr. Matt Russell, comes in and gives us the information and what I like to call the education on where the line is, where it was, and where it could be going, helping me to come out on the other end with a good pick. I foolishly try to pick every single NFL game for the entire season with the goal of just trying to stay above water, be above 500. And of course, I'm trying to help the people here. You need an angle, you need a side. We're trying to give you something for each and every game. That's the goal, right? That's what we try to do here. Lots of fun.
We're trying to win some money, man. Like you're the crazy guy who, 284 games or whatever it is. Let's pick all of the games. Let's get all the action. It's like, we're probably going to end up with some kind of a bet on every single game one way or another if you read my stuff or if you listen to this podcast. But, we're going to try to guide you away from some of the, turn some of the losers into the winners, or at least have more losers turn into winners than winners turn into losers. But above all, we're going to try to be responsible about our betting. And that's going to lead to, honestly, profitability. Like, those two things come in hand. And that's what I think some people who are new to the space don't necessarily understand, right? And like, yes, we're trying to have fun, and nobody believes in betting as fun more than I do. But we can also be responsible about it. And sometimes that means not making a bet, or sometimes that means going a different route than maybe you were otherwise thinking. But, we'll see how it goes this season. The last few seasons have gone pretty well here between our little conglomerate podcast here.
Exactly. And of course, Matt comes from The Score. He's a writer on The Score, so make sure you follow him there for all the whole grain goodness to cash some checks each and every week. What I'm trying to do is just give you a lean on every single game, so that if you so choose, if you want to ride with your squad on Sunday, I'm gonna let you know whether you should pause or if I'm all in on that. I'll try to give you levels, and you'll learn the language to know like how much I'm feeling a bet as opposed to, so we'll get right there. And there's a great game to start, as there always is on Thursday nights. We got the Bills at the Rams to kick off the NFL season. Bills are favored by 2.5 points. And we've heard so much about the Buffalo Bills. You would swear that they won the championship last year. All the hype about the Buffalo Bills, what they're going to do this year, how great they are. It's like, oh yeah, they're playing against the Rams, who, did actually win the Super Bowl last year and are pretty good, but you wouldn't know it just from the hype coming into this game. And I understand that there's a Super Bowl hangover that people like to talk about each and every year. I get that. I understand that. But with that said, give me the Rams plus 2.5 points. That's the side I'm going to be on in this game. We'll get into this more as the season goes along, as people will understand our language of the difference between the 2.5 point spread to the 3 point spread to the 3.5 point spread. So I know with it being under 2.5 or under 3, I get it. I understand it. But I just feel like the Rams are just getting not enough love here. So give me the Rams plus 2.5 points. Mr. Russell, are you with me?
I'm not necessarily with you. I'm not necessarily against you either. If this thing does go to 3, like that's what we're sitting around waiting for, right? And so just to sort of give people, first episode of the new season, the new pod, so to speak, give them sort of a background on kind of like how I go about doing things, right? We can talk about like line moves that have happened over the last like days or months, because that's the difference between week 1 and week 2. But the reality is a line for week 8, a line for week 10, like that has existed. That's existed on certain websites that have basically the entire season already lined for minimal wagers that can be taken. It's not a gigantic limit on a week 10 game between the Broncos and the Chargers or whatever. But these things have all existed because there is a rating within the odds makers for each team. Right. And so the rating for the Rams and the Bills 3 months ago came out to about a Rams minus a half a point, essentially a pick 'em, right? With the idea, okay, the Rams won the Super Bowl and everybody talks, Super Bowl hangover or whatever. The reality is with the Super Bowl hangover is so much goes into winning a Super Bowl from a roster construction and kind of like be willing to kick the salary cap can down the street a little bit. Just kind of go quote unquote all in, right? When the Rams go all in, it doesn't mean they have to disband the franchise the next year. It just means the Von Millers, the Odell Beckhams, like they have to leave. And so they are left with the 3 or 4 stars that they've been building this team around over the course of the last couple of years. And so people look at that and they go, okay, you're missing this player, you're missing that player from that championship run. So you have to take a step back. They look at the Bills and they go, man, if you just had 16 seconds, something like that. I've already forgotten the number. I'm sure any Bills fan out there is yelling at his screen. It was like 13 seconds. Like they were that close to hosting the AFC Championship game, being a significant favorite against the Bengals, and then meeting the Rams in the Super Bowl. And so, yeah, there's been, 8 months have gone by here, but this is kind of like what how the Super Bowl could have, and maybe in some cases should have been from a matchup standpoint. Of course, a lot of time has gone by, and the line has moved because people look at the Bills, and you mentioned sort of the fervor, the hype around the Bills specifically. People are looking for this team to win the Super Bowl this year. Like this is their turn, if you will, right? And maybe it should have been last year. They're looking for this team to be that team. And so how I go about doing things is I look at these teams on a rating scale of 0 to 100, right? I do that for a couple of different reasons. One, it's easy to communicate, right? As somebody who is a content producer and a communicator of sports betting and sports betting theory and handicapping theory, like it's easy for me to say to you, Shell, like I got the Bills rated at about a blah, blah, blah out of 100, right? So in the case of the Bills, really good team, 75, something along those lines, right? We don't often see teams crack the 80 out of 100. Like that's for sort of historically great teams. The Patriots of 07, even the Broncos when Peyton Manning was slinging it around for 50 million touchdowns per season. And then very rarely on the other end does a team dip below 20, right? So we're pretty much looking at a worst team in the league as a 20 and the best team in the league is 80. But in week 1, we don't necessarily know who the best team in the league is, right? Like right now, we've all made this assumption about the Bills. And the problem right now for the Bills is they have to play to that assumption. So after this line moves to 2.5, we look at that and we go, okay, well, what happened here between the Bills and the Rams? Did the Rams really drop, that precipitously in a rating? Because right now, a 2.5 point, let's break it down right now, a 2.5 point spread here for the Bills. With the Rams, I'm only giving the Rams 1 point of home field advantage, right? Okay. The LA home field advantage, it's even less for when the Chargers play. But for the Rams, I'm only giving them 1 point of home field advantage. And so to get to the Bills being 3.5 points better on a quote unquote neutral or 2.5 in LA, we need a discrepancy of something along the lines of Bills at a 77 out of 100 and the Rams down at 60 out of 100.
Yeah.
So just from a valuation standpoint, you go, okay, like, let's say the Bills are that 77. One, we're making assumptions based on absolutely no football being played this season. And we're setting the bar really, really high for the Bills.
Yeah.
And as far as the Rams are concerned, like at a 60, like that's kind of a low valuation on the Rams. Like there is plenty of room for the Rams to exceed that 60 out of 100 rating. And so from a value standpoint, I just look at it and I go like, okay, we're putting their Bills way up here. They need to stay way up here, and actually surpass that. And the Rams have to be, I'm going to use the phrase as bad, but as bad as a 60 out of 100. Now, a 60 out of 100 team is still a playoff team. It's probably something around a wild card team. To be completely honest with you, it's around where I had the Bengals rated last year going into the playoffs. They obviously had a magical run to get to the Super Bowl and whatnot, but like a 60 is still a really good team, but there is room above that for the Rams. So from a betting standpoint, one of the many tenets that you and I have been going over for years is as soon as you see that 2.5, man, especially when it's a home team, that's an immediate tease up to 8.5 for me. A 6-point teaser leg from 2.5 to 8.5 is one of the few valuable teaser legs that you are going to see. Now, again, we wish the total was a little bit lower and points were a little more hard to come by and a little bit more valuable. That always helps when it comes to the plus 8.5 teaser leg. But in this case, like you're getting plus 8.5 to start your week, unless this number goes to 3. And when or if it does, it's going to last about 5 seconds because there are people just sitting there waiting for a sportsbook to move this line to 3. I can't imagine they're just going to move it to 3 and keep it at 3. Like this thing isn't going to close 3, but it might touch 3. I realize that's difficult to just sort of be sitting there waiting on your app for something that might not actually come. So when it comes down to a plus 2.5 to plus 8.5 is a teaser leg for me. If I had to take a total, if I had to bet the total, I would go over 52. I think there's some very good chances both these defenses aren't necessarily all that they're cracked up to be. I will say this about the Bills, because the rating is so high, and that's the important part here, because if I'm going to spend the entire season, quote unquote, slandering the Bills or telling you why the Bills aren't as good as people say they are, you need to know where the rating is. You need to know that they're being considered close to an 80 right now. And that's just too high for a team that, honestly, last season, there's a ton of metrics and a ton of matchup stuff where you can go up and down the schedule too and just be like, man, they had maybe 2 tough games or against really good offenses, and it didn't go great. Right? It didn't go great against the Carson Wentz Colts from a defensive standpoint. It went very badly against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, right? And you go up and down the list, okay, there's not a ton else, right? They got beat up pretty good by the Titans offense early on in the season. And so the schedule might have created a lot of sort of artificial value or artificial, perception, if you will, of just how like unbeatable the Bills might be. I don't see it that way. I think they're going to be a very good team. I took them in an under 10.5 alt win total. They could go 10-7, have a pretty good year, even make the playoffs. And that's a 2-1 bet. That's a plus 200 bet on an alt win total. Like that's a pretty good payout for a team that could still have a very successful season with a schedule that is a lot harder than it was last year.
Yeah, I find it super interesting just thinking about where the Buffalo Bills are in our perception, but also this game, as the first game we're going to talk about, the game to kick off the season, also kicks off a very interesting theme that we will see if it will continue. I'm interested to get your take on the home underdogs, especially early in the season. We will continue that conversation right away, actually, as we move on to our next game, which is the Green Bay Packers as 1.5 point favorites at the Minnesota Vikings. And I know the Vikings got a new coach. I feel like every year for the last few years, we've been on the train of this is the year the Vikings can dethrone Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. And I'm going to be honest with you. I'm here saying it again. I believe this is a year, right? That the Vikings can dethrone the Packers. And I think it starts right here. Like if that's going to happen, they have to win these games, especially the home game. And we know the Vikings have a very good home field advantage. And I just like that. I'm relying on that in this weird line of -1.5. That's sort of strange. So if I think it's going to be a close game, sure, just give me the Vikings outright. If you want to go money line and get spicy, cool, more power to you. I mean, it's 1.5 points, but if you're going to give me any points and I think they're just going to win, let's roll. Give me the Vikings. What say you, Mr. Russell?
I think if you're getting a plus 110 on the money line, right? Like I started sort of 10% return over your wager. I think that's the way you play it with regards to the Vikings. Obviously at a plus 1.5, interesting to potentially tease that up over 7.5. Key numbers have changed over the course of the last couple of years with 2-point conversions and guys wiling out on those decision makings at the end of games,
and also just kickers being not good.
Yeah, and obviously, the extra point element, has changed things as well, right? 7 and 3, but certainly 7 isn't nearly as key as it used to be. And so, when this was, and if it goes back to a 2.5, which I don't really see happening because there has been this groundswell for the Vikings, then we would be looking at another teaser leg, right? A plus 2.5 up over 8.5. That's absolutely something that we would do. But I'm with you, man. And again, like it's unnerving because, you and I, we both consume content as well as produce it. Like, the groundswell over the course of the off season. That's what's so tricky about week 1, because if I never listened to anybody say anything, like I would be on the Vikings because, and this is where I go hand up, my bad. Like last year, I thought Mike Zimmer had a chance to win Coach of the Year before the season started because I'm like, there's too much talent on this team. Justin Jefferson was going into his second year and was obviously ended up being awesome. And you think about like the jump that the offense took once Justin Jefferson joined that team. And then you go, okay, Mike Zimmer's a defensive coach. Like he's got to have these, things tightened up and yada, yada, yada. And it just never happened. And not because they got blown out every game, because they had catastrophic, ridiculous loss every game. So I wrote about that a little bit in the last week, but there's like a laundry list. And, I talked about it all over the course of the season last year. There's a laundry list of games, man, where it's overtime game and last play of the game against like the Lions and Dalvin Cook fumble at Cincinnati and like Arizona at the bell and all of these different things. You go like, and they still won like 8 games. Right. And then we ended up seeing Sean Mannion, in Green Bay in the second to last week of the season. Like I would have liked to seen Kirk Cousins in that game just to see what, might have happened. But by then it was far too late because they had lost these close games because Mike Zimmer, if I said to you, Shell, at the end of the year, like, what do we need to change here from the Vikings? You'd probably be like the coach. Right. And it's like they did that. And they didn't bring in some retread guy that we already know is not going to understand how fourth downs, decision-making work or how challenges and timeouts work. I have to be the guy who's going, I think Kevin O'Connell probably knows how to do this. Now, maybe he doesn't know how to do it. And honestly, he's coming from like working under Sean McVay, who doesn't necessarily know how to do it either. But he also worked in an organization where Brandon Staley, first mention to Brandon Staley, by the way, everybody go ahead and drink. But like he
hadn't even gotten anywhere close to that game yet.
I know, I'm not even remotely close to that game, but I had to just for the old heads out there. But like, Brandon Staley comes out and he's like, I'm going to do it way differently than Sean McVay. So like, just because he worked under Sean McVay last year doesn't mean like he has no clue how game management works. But if you get into the cracks, right, you get into the corners, and you turn things around from that standpoint. You don't have your defense playing 3 yards into the end zone on a last-second attempt by the Detroit Lions. Like, if you win a couple of extra high-leverage plays, or you put your team in an opportunity to have a high-leverage play, and you have the talent the Vikings have, like, they can flip 5 wins. Not going to be easy necessarily, but like it's certainly possible. And so I think this team can win 13 games. Now, the thing is, unlike the Bills, no one's asking them to win 13 games, right? Like the Bills have to win 12 games to, hit their over. They have to win 12 or 13 games to win a AFC East bet at minus 250, something along those lines. We're getting plus 250s with the Vikings here. We're getting them as home underdogs to a Packers team who they might be just as good as, right? And so like everything is all about value. And so if you priced them the same way you price some of these other teams, then I wouldn't want necessarily anything to do with kind of guessing on Kevin O'Connell. But like I'll guess on Kevin O'Connell if I'm getting decent prices to do that. And one of the prices is to actually win the NFC, the conference in and of itself. And you're getting like 15-1 on the Vikings. And honestly, all that's really required is that they kind of trade places with the Packers. because what you want to do is you want to be betting on a team that can win the conference in the regular season, skip the first round of the playoffs. And that's value right there before you even get into like, is this team even any good? Think about the Titans last year. Everybody forgets, like speaking of teams, overhyped, underhyped, this is the underhyped team, and maybe appropriately, but like they did finish first over the course of the AC. And like, I don't like them necessarily this year, but I think other teams can do that, right? We see it in the NBA where a team has a good regular season. Doesn't really matter what they do in the playoffs. If you just got to buy through the first round of the NBA playoffs, you would be more valuable because you didn't have a chance to lose. And so all the Vikings have to do is switch spots with the Packers, who had the 1 seed last year in the NFC. And now, easier said than done, but for the price that we're getting, I think there's better than like the 30% chance that the odds makers are giving them with the implied win probability here. So like, if I think it's closer to 40% or 45% that they do it, win the division, that is like, that's absolutely going to be a bet for me. And honestly, because they're playing in week 1, doesn't make a ton of sense not to be on the Vikings there at home to knock off the Packers and get their season started right.
Yeah, let's go. I'm fully all in on the Vikings in this game for sure. And I mean, hey, I can't lie. As a Niners fan, and there's been a lot of playoff matchups versus the Packers, even going back to the Brett Favre days, wasn't about that Brett Favre life. Definitely not about that Aaron Rodgers life. So any excuse, I'm with it. Let's keep things moving here, though, as we got the Steelers at the Bengals, another nice divisional matchup here. This one's very interesting, and I'm very interested to hear your take here because the Bengals are favored by 6.5 points. And we talked a little bit already about key numbers. Now, it's not at the 7. It's just below 7 at 6.5. I'm leaning Bengals, but I can be persuaded here because I'm thinking this is a game where, everyone is down on the Steelers, and I get it. But my flip side to that is Ben Roethlisberger couldn't throw more than 5 yards.
Right.
And I'm not saying Trubisky is good, but there's a very easy world in which he's just better than what Big Ben was the last 2 years. And if you give me someone who's a little bit better than Big Ben was the last 2 years, that team's not that bad. And I don't think that they're 6.5 point favorites. You know what? On the fly, I'm changing it. I'm on the Steelers. I just talked myself into the Steelers, but I'd like to hear what you say. And it'll be really funny if you come back right now and say the Bengals. That'll be really funny. But I'm on the Steelers. Give me the points. Change my mind, please.
Oh, you just sent the control room, up in arms right now, having to change some sort of graphic on that.
Can't find the logo.
Okay, so let's work backwards here, right? Obviously, Bengals, Super Bowl team, is the expectation that they're going to return or be sort of one of the top teams. Even though you make the Super Bowl, it's still the Bengals. What did we have to do? We had the lead in the fourth quarter in the Super Bowl, and we're still not getting any regard now. But they are getting some regard here with this spread. And so, week 1. I'm not gonna put it on you to try to guess, okay, what do you think this team's rating is or blah, 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 blah. But right now, the suggestion right here is that the Bengals are about a 63, right? Which, again, we talked about last year going into the playoffs. They're kind of around 60. So I'm actually bumping them up here. And if they're a 63, that means the Steelers are a 44. Right. Okay. And if you look at the win total and that sort of thing, they're hovering around 500, if you will. But a 44 obviously suggests a worse than average team. But there is something obviously about the Steelers, right? And it's they know how to win in the cracks. And it's not that Trubisky is better than Roethlisberger or this, that, or whatever. It's that he does more stuff, right? Yes. The mobility for Trubisky and the taking what the defense will give you element with Trubisky. And he can air it out every once in a while, right? Because again, he's got a stronger arm than Roethlisberger at this point in time. But not forcing the things the way that Roethlisberger would force things, not realizing that physically he wasn't the same as he had been, obviously when he was a younger man, much like the rest of us, by the way, right? And so if Trubisky comes in and, part of the thing is this isn't just a guy who didn't have any competition in camp. Now, again, Mason Rudolph's not exactly the most exciting prospect of all time, but Kenny Pickett looked pretty good in the preseason and is a first, draft pick by the Steelers. And so it's like, they would love it if and love it's probably a stretch, but like they wouldn't mind it if Trubisky wasn't good enough to get the starting job, and that they could just let Pickett go and like see what they had. But like Trubisky legitimately won that job, and he just played under Brian Daboll behind Josh Allen for a year in Buffalo. And by the way, when he was in Chicago, there's a couple of playoff appearances, right? And it was not like he was the reason for those playoff appearances. It was largely a team effort and defense and all of that sort of thing. Well, guess who's got a really good defense?
Right.
Defensive player of the year, right? The Pittsburgh Steelers. And so like this can work for Trubisky and the Steelers. And, a lot of people reference last year when they went into Buffalo, won outright, being about a 6.5 point underdog here. So again, not necessarily out of the question. It is interesting that this line, we're starting to see this week a bunch of lines move, even though everybody's had all this time over the course of the summer to make these bets. And we've had 2 weeks since the end of the preseason. And honestly, nothing's really happened in the last 2 weeks to change anything for anybody. But we are seeing lines move. This one's not moving an inch, right? This has stayed at 6.5. You are not. And again, maybe as soon as you listen to this, you flip over to your sportsbook and this has gone up to 7. I'll say this. I can't imagine this going to 7. Like, you're not giving the Steelers a flat 7. There's probably a better chance this sort of closes at 6. 5.5 would be a bit of a stretch. So I think you're certainly on to something here with the Steelers plus 6.5. Obviously, I would say wait and see. Maybe it does go to 7. Maybe I'm wrong, but I really don't think that's going to be the case. And I'm high on this Bengals team, but I'm also maybe a little bit higher on the Steelers than the market is. So maybe this ends up being, instead of 63 out of 100 for the Bengals and 44 out of 100 for the Steelers, maybe the Steelers are a 50 and maybe the Bengals are a 68, 69, 70 type of team this year, because they addressed the offensive line that was like the one major bugaboo for them last season. Maybe both these teams are just better than we even are ready to give them credit for. But I think there's a little bit too much of a disparity right now in the ratings to make this sort of, a line as high as it is.
And what's super interesting to me about this as well is I'm trying to remember. I feel like it always takes me until about week 3, maybe 2 on a good year, where I remember all of the principles that, are like the gambling. What did Simmons use? The manifesto, so to speak, like, wait a second, divisional matchup. And even if I do think that the Bengals are the same high flying team from last year and they're going right back to the Super Bowl and all that, cool. This is still a divisional game against the Steelers. Right. So like all of those little things that I need to remind myself of, very interesting. But everything you just said, I'm on the Steelers plus 6.5. And another divisional game coming up again, right? It's, we're talking the same thing. Same principles are coming up here. Divisional matchup. And we're looking at another team that are home underdogs. And that is the Eagles are on the road as 4-point favorites against the Lions. A lot of love for the Eagles this season, a lot of love. And I didn't watch Hard Knocks, so I'm not following, like, there was no, falling for the Hard Knocks love affair or whatever. But we did talk last year a lot about our guy, Man Campbell, and just his motivational tactics. And he's just a football guy and all that other fun stuff and the rah, rah, rah. Really, the reason I'm looking here at this game is, again, what I've talked about early in the season, home dogs, and also the 4-point spread is really weird to me. And you're over a field goal. So I'm going to automatically lean to taking the dogs anyways. But I really like this. And I think people have had a lot of time to talk themselves into the Eagles. Everyone's done their fantasy draft and they've taken Hurts way higher than they probably should. All that fun stuff.
Yeah.
Either way, give me the Lions plus 4. That's where I'm at.
So some things you need to do when you're, again, week 1, you're talking about the principles, and, one of these days we should actually write these down in some sort of list form. But one of them is understanding your own biases. And one of my biases is, like, I love a mobile quarterback. I think it's an absolute dagger in your throat to give up a scramble 3rd and 6, right?
Shouts to Trey.
And so
we're getting there.
And so Jalen, And I'm not the only one, right?
I know.
We'll get there.
We'll get
so anyway,
there. We'll get there.
So I mean, I like Jalen Hurts more than most people do, right? It's like,
Mhm.
all the hand wringing about Jalen Hurts, and like, you look at this Eagles roster and it's loaded, but everybody just comes back to like Jalen Hurts and whatever. And like, I want to see guys improve. And all I've ever seen out of Jalen Hurts is improvement year to year
Correct.
to year to year, right? This is a guy who, improved from his Alabama days to his Oklahoma days. He improved on his draft stock, going not in the first round to like being a starting quarterback in the NFL that like at least somebody is willing to, give the keys to the car to, if you will, right? But it's the classic situation of team with a rookie quarterback or sort of on a rookie deal on a whatever it's called, the entry level deal, being able to spend money elsewhere, and especially when you're not even paying first round money to a Jalen Hurts. And like, that's the plan. Teams only ever win when a guy is on their rookie deal, or if they're an absolute legend, right? Like, it's very few and far between, right? Winning the Super Bowl. Now, I'm not saying the Eagles are winning the Super Bowl here, but like, it is hard to ignore a pretty loaded roster around Jalen Hurts. And one of my biggest complaints last year about the Eagles was the wide receiving core. I watched that game against Tampa, and like, it wasn't great for Hurts, but it also wasn't any good for their wide receiving core. And what do? Right? Like the Bengals, they go like, what? We had a good season, but what's our flaw? Bengals offensive line, boom, total overhaul of that offensive line. Wide receiving core for the Eagles, boom, AJ Brown, right? Out of nowhere. Basically on draft day or a day before the draft, that draft week. And so I get why the Eagles are hyped. There's more legitimacy to it, to me, than the Lions being hyped. Now, I like the Lions as from a concept of, big underdog. The thing that no one really talks about with Lions is the offensive line being healthy and together, which they didn't have last year. And so Dan Campbell can just run all he wants and keep the ball out of Jared Goff's hands, unless, it's an advantageous play action type situation, because he has all of those guys up front. And like, that's where the Lions have been building. Now, the Lions are not done building. The defense is going to be atrocious again. The secondary is just completely nameless, but they've gone and they're like, you know what? We just drafted a bunch of offensive linemen. Okay, let's go to the defensive line. Boom. They get Aiden Hutchinson to fall into their lap, but there's only so much that guy can do. Right. And so eventually they're going to get rid of Jared Goff, and they're going to get that first round draft pick quarterback, and they're going to have him for 4 years on a rookie deal, and they're going to be able to surround him and a mature offensive line and a mature defense with veterans and all of that sort of thing. So like, it's looking up for the Lions. But right now, it is kind of all hype when there isn't the talent to back it up. Whereas the Eagles have the hype that has the, it stems from something. It stems from the guys that are on that team, the draft that they had with a couple of first round picks. And so I just look at this and I go, I think this is just Eagles the whole way with the Lions. Like 4 points, like, it's a lot sometimes and it's not that much other times. This one feels where it's not that much. Now, from a rating standpoint, it makes a little bit more sense that this line is where it is, right? This sort of makes the Eagles about a 60, which I think is a pretty high end. We talked about playoff team being sort of hovering around 60, and a playoff team that's improved themselves should be, I don't want to say bare minimum, but like 60 makes a ton of sense for them. And with the Lions being at home, I have them a 1.5 home field advantage. By the way, if you ever hear anybody say anything about 3 points for home field advantage, stop what you're doing, delete that podcast, unsubscribe. The reality is, these days, 1.7 is sort of average when it comes to home field advantage. So 1.5 for the Lions is slightly below, what an average home field advantage should be. And the Lions are a 34. That's what makes this line make sense. You always say, like, make this make sense. This is Eagles 60, Lions 34. Now, if we've watched Hard Knocks and we're excited about the trenches that the Lions have built, then you can make the case that the Lions are maybe higher than a 34. But we don't know it yet. Right? We at least know the Eagles were a playoff team, and that we can sell ourselves on them being a 60, high 50s type of team. Right now, the sales job for the Lions being a 30, anything better than a 35, like that's kind of smoke and mirrors. That's kind of Dan Campbell hype at this point. So I think this is one we rarely do the road favorites.
Okay.
But honestly, the Eagles walked into Detroit last year and absolutely annihilated. I think it was like 41-10 or something along those lines. I don't think they do that necessarily, but like I think this is a pretty fair bet here on the Eagles -4.
I'm doing this live. We are having our first moment here on this year's pod where I can say that I have been convinced. You changed the pick from the Lions to the Eagles. I've been convinced by Mr. Matt Russell.
Control room scrambling again.
Scrambling to change the pick.
Yeah, it's on fire.
I mean, this comes down to one of my other favorite things that I just had a flashback to. Those moments of when you're sitting there on Sunday and you're just thinking, did I really get this wrong because I bet on the Lions? Like if I bet on the Eagles and they mess up, okay, cool, whatever. They had a bad game, whatever, right? It's almost like that's on them. But if I'm sitting here and I'm like, I was on the Eagle or I'm on the Lions, go Lions, blah, blah, blah. And you're sitting there, that moment you're sitting there on Sunday.
Sure.
Like I had it. Oh, my friend and yours, Carson Wentz, right? Like, did I really sat here riding with Carson Wentz again? I love to do that last year.
This is like this is like he channeled you, because what I was just going to say is there's going to be tons of opportunities to bet on the Lions this year. And all it's going to take is one big loss in week 1 to start getting value back on the Lions. And guess who they host in week 2? Your man, Carson Wentz and the Washington Commanders. I would tell you right now, like that line based on these ratings that have been called from the current point spreads. These aren't even my own opinion ratings. I'm literally taking them from where the point spreads are this week. Yeah. That would be a pick'em game next week between the Commanders and the Lions. And that's a scenario where I could see the Lions winning a football game. And by the way, based on what happens this week in week 1, we might be even getting some points with the Lions at home against the Commanders next week.
I see where your head's at. Always working towards a feature. I like it.
You got it, pal.
Let's keep things moving here. It's a big time game, at least headline wise, as we got the Browns at the Panthers. Now, it's not as big of a game as, it might have been if someone else who I will not name at this moment, but we know who we're talking about, was taking part in said festivities. But that person is not around for obvious reasons. Browns at Panthers. This is about Baker, right? Yeah. Baker has been talking his talk. And I get it. I'd be very salty too, right? If I was in the situation that Baker Mayfield was. Yeah. I got to be honest. This is going to sound silly. I say a lot of ridiculous things on these pods that we do, in which I know you look at me and you're like, bro, that has nothing to, there's no stat behind that. There's no anything. I just want to live in a world in which I cannot see the football gods allowing the Cleveland Browns to win this game against Baker Mayfield. I would just like to have some belief in the football gods that they will let the Panthers and Baker Mayfield just get this dub, just ball out and get this dub. And you're telling me it's 1.5 points? Like Baker has to be up at night, just like dreaming and like doing extra push-ups and doing extra workouts and doing whatever else Baker needs to do to wake up feeling dangerous. Yeah. All that other fun stuff. And on the flip side, shouts to Jacoby Brissett, by the way, and the Browns. But I'm going to take the Panthers here by the -1.5 and just say, like, if you got to show out for one game, Baker Mayfield, this has to be it. And I know that's not, that's not some like gambling stat or anything to back that up. But this is why I'm here.
but it's based on a concept that you and I have been talking about for years, right? It's chip on his shoulder, Baker Mayfield. Like it's this weird back and forth universe. It's why Baker Mayfield's so frustrating. If he just stunk all of the time, we wouldn't be having these conversations about Baker Mayfield, right? He wouldn't have gone first overall in the NFL draft when he came out of Oklahoma. He wouldn't be on the Panthers. He wouldn't have beaten out Sam Darnold. We wouldn't never have to hear about it. Problem is, he is good sometimes, and it just happens to frequently correlate with when people are kind of talking bleep about Baker Mayfield, right? And then we give him a bunch of credit for these wins and really good play. And then the very next week, he looks atrocious, right? And we go like, oh, this Baker Mayfield, he's infuriating. Like, what are we doing? Like, they'll go home, and they'll lose to like some team that they had no business necessarily losing to because he throws 4 interceptions. And then the cycle starts back over again, right? And it's why Cleveland has basically been around a 500 team for the last few years. Like, yes, they made the playoffs, but, like wild card team. And then he gets injured last year, and like you have to feel bad for him, right? And part of what I sort of do as a human being is I go like, well, what if it were me? What if it were me who was like strapped in with a sore shoulder and just like thrown out there to play an NFL season because like we didn't really want to invest in you any further, and like we didn't really have anything else to do other than kind of just throw you out there? I'd be pretty bitter about that too. Now, the problem is the Browns are a decidedly better football team outside of the quarterback position than the Carolina Panthers, right? The other problem is we don't know what to rate the Browns at this point. You can't even use their win total at this point because they are going 11 games without the aforementioned, unmentioned quarterback. And like even the win total doesn't make sense because their win probability for the first 11 games is decidedly different than their win probability for the last 6 games, right? And so like the math will make your head hurt. And I wrote over the course of this offseason, I did 32 team previews, sort of just a reminder on like, okay, who's on what team? Like, what is the expectation for this team? Who could be a candidate for what award, et cetera, et cetera. And like, we couldn't even really do the Browns. And so we waited until the 32nd, I was already done. They were the 32nd team. And I'm just like, all right, let's just do the math here on what that guy means to the point spread versus his replacement. And this line was 5.5 road favorites for the Browns when that guy was the quarterback or was supposed to be the quarterback, right? And then it drops when we think it's going to be Mayfield on the Browns side of things. And then it moves even further when it's Jacoby Brissett. And then also you have to factor in the upgrade from Sam Darnold to Baker Mayfield. So all of that is to say, like, my head hurts at the end of the day. And right now, based on this point spread, again, 1.5, there was some 2.5, but at 1.5, this implies, okay, let's try to make a rating on the Panthers, for example. Like, I don't think we can make a rating on the Panthers, given the fact that their win total is 5.5, 6, like something along those lines. We can't make them a 50 out of 100. They're not an average team. If they were, everybody would be obliterating the over on the Panthers. Now, maybe they end up being a pretty good team. Maybe they end up getting that 7th wild card spot. Who knows what might happen in the NFC South, blah, 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 blah. Point is, like, right now, they can't be a 50. So let's call them like a 44, right? Let's give them a ton of credit, by the way, in calling them a 44, because honestly, again, their win total suggests something like a 37. But we're going to give them some credit because McCaffrey's back and Mayfield and all of this stuff. Well, what does that mean the Browns are if they're minus, if the Panthers are minus 1.5 here?
Yeah.
Doesn't really, not really great, for the Browns. We're talking something in the 30s. Now, just because they don't have that guy as the quarterback and they have a guy, a veteran, sometimes it looks okay. A lot of times it doesn't. Like, where were the Browns going to be if that guy was the quarterback for these games? Well, they were rated up there with the Ravens and the Bengals, right? Like, those 3 teams were co-favorites, essentially, in the AFC North back before we realized this guy was getting suspended, in the way that he was. And so if the Browns are the Bengals, just instead of Joe Burrow, they've got Jacoby Brissett, like, are we knocking them down from, what did we call the Bengals, a 63? Are we knocking them down from a 63 all the way down to like a 30? Like, man, like, that seems really, 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 really low, right? So, like, that's the tricky thing for me. All of this is to say, like, I don't have anything that I necessarily love here because we have the Baker Mayfield chip on the shoulder premise, but against a team that, like, would you be stunned if that defense didn't allow Baker Mayfield to do anything? And then it's just all hopefully Christian McCaffrey if you're a Panthers fan. Like, this is a rough one. You take it as far as you're willing to go with it. I liked it better when it was 2.5, and we could go up to 8.5 as the sort of second or third leg on a 6-point teaser. So We saw this get as high as 2.5 with the Panthers. I don't know if that ship has necessarily sailed. We'll see come game day whether this goes up to 2.5. If it does, if people are looking to pile in here on the Panthers, I'll take the Browns. I don't think it's getting to 3 here. If it did, I would absolutely take the Browns at a flat 3. But I would love a plus 8.5 teaser leg here with the Browns.
Okay. The Browns are a very interesting team, and they will be for the whole season, trying to rate them and see what's going on with our guy, Jacoby Brissett. Another team I'm super interested in seeing how they do this season, as there are some changes, are the Kansas City Chiefs. And a theme that we would always talk about would be the Chiefs tax. And I find it very interesting to see how, that trend will continue or discontinue heading into this season without Tyreek Hill in attendance, right?
Right.
So we get this week 1 line of the Chiefs on the road against the Cards, and the Chiefs are favored by 6.5 points. That's less than a touchdown. And my early lean is to take the Chiefs, but then I pause myself because I'm like, this is what I always do with the Chiefs, right? It's less than a touchdown. And of course, the Chiefs by less than a touchdown, got to take that. I just think I'm going to get fooled by it at least for 1 week before I adjust to what I normally should be doing with the Chiefs, if that makes sense. The drama, I'm adding in the drama of the whole Kyler Murray contract, and you need to do your homework stuff and all that jazz. And Kingsbury's probably, running on fumes in there. And
Sure.
I don't know how that's going to go, but also I feel like KC will want to come out and show and prove like, no, we're good without Tyreek. We'll be okay. So if I'm fooled on Sunday watching this game and the Chiefs don't cover this spread, I'm going to be okay with that. But I will rely on the Chiefs here. I will rely on Patrick Mahomes, and give me the Chiefs in the minus 6.5 points.
All right. So if I was your advisor, your sports betting NFL advisor, which some may say I am.
Hold on. Yeah, I was going to say, hold on. Wait, what? Isn't that the name of the pod? What's going on?
The last 2 seasons would say that's exactly what you are, sir. I would jump in front of this bet so fast and so aggressively. But not for the reasons that you might think, because listen, it's a point spread bet by sort of definition. It's a 50-50 chance of winning. We are out here sort of fundamentally flipping coins. But the reality is we've had 3 months here. You could have bet on the Chiefs minus 3. You could have bet last week on the Chiefs minus 3.5. There was even some 4. And somehow, some way, we got off the rails. Now, maybe there's some sort of Kyler Murray news that's pending here, and we're already into flashbacks of last season where a line would move and you'd be like, okay, who does that? What is that? Who's going to be out? What I mean? What are we waiting? Okay, who's got this, that, or whatever. That's the only explanation for this line jumping from 3 and 3.5 all summer to 6.5. So by rule, number 1 tenant, or at least the top 3 tenant of what we do here is you cannot get the worst of this, right? We cannot allow that to happen. Again, the Chiefs may win by 100 points, right? Yeah. They win by the hook. They might, win by 7 or whatever, right? And this is beyond the sort of Chiefs tax element that we've talked about in recent years. We'll have to see whether that's happening or not. I'll put it this way. We're talking about a road favorite of 6.5 points, right? And so let's, use the Cardinals. We talked about home field advantage. I got the Cardinals at a 1.5 point home field advantage, right? So again, right around league average. I'm not giving them anything crazy here. You could make the case that Arizona does have maybe a little bit more of a home field advantage than that. But to get this to a 6.5 point road favorite here, let's do the thing, right? Okay, let's start with the Chiefs. I think the Chiefs are a team that's a little easier to rate, right? If I asked you to go out of 100 here, you're not going to be 42 or 53, right? You're going to probably be well, we just talked about how the Bills are being sort of considered about a 77. And, so okay, I don't think maybe they're as good as the Bills. So something along the lines of 75 or 76, right? So let's just say for right now that the Chiefs are a 75. Do you know what that means the Cardinals have to be for them to be 6.5 point underdogs at home? The Cardinals, who were in the playoffs last year. Now, I realize that DeAndre Hopkins got hurt and things went south there, and he's obviously not starting the season with them and won't be ready for this game and all of that sort of thing. means the Cardinals have to be down in that like, zone where we just talked about the Browns being, right? In this like mid 30s type of zone, like a 35 out of 100. No one like disliked, if you will, from a betting standpoint, the Cardinals more than I did last year, right? And I took my victory lap when after 10-0 or whatever, 10-1 or whatever they were, I was getting all these people going like, oh, Cardinal, how do you have them so low in your ratings? Like, because win-loss record is meaningless halfway through the season when it comes to actually rating the quality of the team. And what happened? They basically lost all of their games down the stretch, or certainly the high leverage ones. And so I'm right there going, yeah, I don't really think that much of this Cardinals team, right? Ready to fade them. I'm sitting here with an even money Cardinals not to make the playoffs bet. That is now something like minus 150, right?
Yeah.
I've been on this and I've been on it for a while, but I can't get this low on the Cardinals. I can't get to 34 out of 100 on a power rating scale for these guys. You know what I mean? Like they're getting a point and only a point and a half. That's an 8-point swing here for the Chiefs. There's no way the Chiefs are 8 points better than the Cardinals at neutral in a neutral site game here. Can't be, again.
Can't do it.
Yeah, exactly. And if this goes to 7, like then it turns into like an auto bet on the Cardinals. But at plus 6.5 is certainly going to end up being a bet for me. Just nothing crazy, just a regular bet. But I mean, plus 7 would be absolutely insane. But honestly, I didn't think we'd get to a point where plus 6.5 existed. So,
So this is a few things here. One, I know the messed up bet I'm making when I'm making it. Right. So I'm acknowledging this on two things. We will discuss this next week when we discuss whatever the Chiefs game is next week. But it will be the moment where I will sit here and I will say, you know what? I watched the game and I watched the Chiefs screw this up and I'm okay with that. And the lesson is learned in week 1 and we will move on, because you're right. There are multiple things aiming in the direction of Chiefs being overvalued again. The lines moved so much, and also the Cards being the home underdog, which has been something that we've talked about multiple games before. Like all these things are leading me to, yes, probably should take the Cards.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't even think, and that's why I say I'm not sure there's a Chiefs tax in the way that we've talked about it in years past. Because when we talk about the Chiefs tax, we talk about the fear that people have of Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, right? That's the only thing that you're afraid of when it comes to the Chiefs over the last 4 years. Tyreek Hill's gone. Okay, so now the Chiefs tax would have to be literally just off of Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. Might exist, right? But as we talked about, like, if it exists, it's because now, they're, let's put it this way. If the Cardinals aren't being rated right now as like a mid-30s team, and they're being rated as like a mid-40s team, this spread then means the Chiefs are being rated like a mid-80s team, which is even crazier, relatively speaking, than the Cardinals being really rated really low, if you know what I mean, right? And so that's the thing that we have to see next week when the Chiefs host the Chargers on Thursday Night Football. Like if that line is crazy and like out of control beyond something that's like, -3 for the Chiefs or even -3.5, then we're going to know that it's because the Chiefs are rated so highly and it's not about the Cardinals. And if it's the Chiefs rated so highly, then the tax exists. I'm a little bit higher than most on the Chiefs this year, I think, or at least offensively, because I think they're going to do the spread the ball around thing and still be really dangerous. But it's more about the Cardinals cannot be this bad to be rated this low right now.
I got you. So let's keep things moving here. I'm going to be on the Chiefs, but I don't really like it, but that's just where we're at this point. Next, let's move on to another big boy game here between the Raiders and the Chargers. Chargers are at home and favored by 3 points. Raiders obviously adding Devontae Adams, new coach, and Josh McDaniels. This game has been bet down already, if I'm not mistaken. I feel like the Chargers were bigger favorites. It was at least at 3.5 already, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, exactly.
So this game's been bet down already. So I don't like taking the Raiders because I've already missed at least a half a point here.
Okay.
But I still like the fact that the Raiders, I just think that they will be a better team this year than, the things that we've seen from the past, if we'll say. I just think that they have the players, and especially on offense, like that offense, I'm so excited to see. You give McDaniels all these toys, he should be able to figure out how to make this offense pretty damn good. But I know you love the Chargers, so I'm very interested to hear.
Honestly, and again, I may have to repeat this in every episode over the course of the year because people didn't really seem to understand it last year. Like, Brandon Staley is not my son. He's not my father. He's not my brother. I don't care. I've never met the man. I don't know anything about the man. All I know is from a thought process and decision-making standpoint, if we had 32 coaches in the NFL do what he does as far as making intellectual decisions based on probabilities, and along with the personality and personnel of his team, i.e., if you showed up for work as the head coach of a football team, looked around and realized that your defense wasn't particularly good, and there was kind of nothing you could do about it, then you would probably want to keep the ball in your offense's hands as much as humanly possible. And then after the season, you would say to the general manager, help me on defense. Here is what I need. And if that general manager said, sure, here's Khalil Mack, JC Jackson, and like 2 or 3 run-stopping specialists to plug holes in the defense that literally cost you a playoff spot when they couldn't stop one rushing play that they knew was coming in advance, right? Like, I'm sorry. Like, what else am I supposed to ask for? I want every coach to make these decisions based on what they have in front of them, both from a probability, mathematical studying standpoint, and a personnel standpoint. All that is to say, both of these teams, I think, are really interesting for obvious reasons, right? Like, they both have kind of an unlimited ceiling. Like, if the Raiders just won the Super Bowl this year, like, it'd be pretty surprising. Like, the defense is probably pretty still shaky, but the offense might be really, really, really good with McDaniels coordinating like Carr and all of the weapons that he has. And if they get out of the AFC West, say they won the AFC West, like, they probably are a really, really good team. So, like, what is their ceiling when it comes to a rating? Because right now they're sort of looked at as the 4th best team. Everybody sort of has enough regard to say that they have a chance to win the division, almost as like it's almost like saying something nice about the AFC West. Like, they're so good, the Raiders could win the division. And then when you ask somebody if they think the Raiders are going to win the divisions, they go like, well, no, right? Like, they don't want to bet that, right? And I totally understand that. And so, like, the win total is 8.5, which we're going to do some quick mathematics here, is exactly half of 17 games, which if you were just basing off ratings for win totals would be 50 out of 100. Problem is, part of that win total is the fact that they've got 6 games against the Chiefs, Broncos, and Chargers. So it has to be graded on a curve. So there has to be a little bit more put into a preseason rating than just, well, what does the market think they're going to do from a win standpoint, right? The market says 8-1, or 8.5 wins. Well, that means 50%. It's like, no, they have to be a little bit better than that. So let's give them a 10% bump. Let's bump them up to 55% before we do anything. Well, if that's the case, the Chargers then, to be 3 to 3.5 point favorites here, they got to be something around 66, right? And we already talked about how we basically give them no home field advantage. And so when you look at it like that and you go, okay, the Chargers could be a 66. We talked about, like, that's definitely a playoff team. That's maybe a division champion, depending on sort of how your division shakes out. But it also leaves room to be a lot better. And when you have the loaded roster that the Chargers have, we're looking at the Chargers going like, if you told me they were a 78 by the end of the season, I'd be like, makes sense. A lot of the roster's insane. And if you told me the Raiders were a 67, by the end of the season, I totally believe that. So both these teams can sort of shuffle along together. This isn't one, rated here and the other one rated anywhere around here. They're both sort of accurately rated. I just don't know where they are, right? I think they're probably, I think the Chargers are probably this amount better than the Raiders, but both teams might be really, 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 really good. And it might, they could meet again in the same situation in the playoffs, and the Chargers could be to 3 to 3.5 point favorites. And we might have a better opinion of both of these teams because they both got a lot better. So, my numbers, if I'm looking at this, I go, Chargers, I think there's more. So it's kind of like Eagles, Lions, where it's like, I think there's more, definitive stuff that we know about the Chargers. Whereas the Raiders, it's all, it's still a lot of it is hypothetical. And when it's hypothetical, like I want to take big shots. I want to take David Carr to lead the league in passing yards. I want to take like big money, plus money type things and see if it hits. Whereas like in a point spread, that's only -3. Yeah, I'm kind of more looking for the team that I think I know what I'm going to get. And I think I'm going to get better decision-making from Staley, even sort of perceptively from last year, because I think the defense is going to be better. So he's not going to be wiling out with his 4th down calls, right? I think that was a very season-specific thing. But he also knows that he's got one of the best quarterbacks in the league. So I expect him to keep doing that. And I'm here for that. And I wish every coach did that. And that's all I'm saying about the Brandon Staley thing. And I'll probably have to say it every week for the rest of the season.
No, I got you. Let's keep things moving here, and we'll kind of speed things up here, get through a bunch more of these games here. We got the Saints as 5.5-point favorites at the Falcons. Vegas zone. Do I have to take the Falcons here just because they're home dogs and it's 5.5 points? Jameis versus Mariota. I feel like there's too many points for. Is it Jameis? Jameis is starting for the Saints, right? I have that right. Too many points for me to lay with Jameis on the road. I don't care who they're playing against, but too many points for me. I'm on the Falcons here.
It comes back to, again, uncertainty, right? And like, there isn't a ton of certainty with the Saints right now because we don't know what version of Michael Thomas we're going to get. And we don't know that Jameis is like 100% healthy. Obviously, he missed all of the preseason, and there's, some foot, I believe it was a foot injury element. So we don't know. But again, what do we do when we don't necessarily know, but there's potential? Like, we look for high, payout type bets. I think the Saints are a pretty good bet.
Okay.
To do some really good things this season. Doesn't mean they're definitely going to do it, but if we're looking at 15-1, Vikings type thing, I think they're a lot like the Vikings, to be honest with you, right? Kirk Cousins, Jameis Winston, like nobody's dying to grab them in a fantasy draft. Nobody's dying to watch them, on a Monday night. You don't really want to grab them as favorites, which again is sort of the point with this game specifically. But like, both have played really good football for stretches at a time, and both are surrounded by a lot of really good weapons. And the Saints, especially, the defense is really, really good. And so what do they have to do? They just have to, like the Vikings, switch places with the Buccaneers. And they have this advantage of owning the Buccaneers. 4 straight wins since Tom Brady got to Tampa Bay. The Saints win every time and won the division 2 years ago. All that is to say, though, that uncertainty, that like idea that this team might be good, might not necessarily manifest itself in the first game.
Exactly. Like they could still win, but 5.5 is a lot.
They certainly could still win. And then you look at the Falcons, and I look at this and I go, the market couldn't hate the Falcons more, right? Like a team that won, what did they win? Like 6 games, something like 7 games, like. And they had large, people look at the roster and everything that they did last year. They didn't get any sacks and like the blah, blah, blah. And like now Matt Ryan's gone. Like, again, I'm a sucker for a mobile quarterback. I have a theory that Marcus Mariota, had he been drafted to a dome team, might have ended up being one of the best quarterbacks we'd ever seen, because when he came out of college with his speed, if he had been used properly, he might be a lot, highly regarded than he is right now. And the other element is he was with the Titans. And, they had a shuffling of coaches over the years during his tenure. And then Arthur Smith, a Titans offensive coordinator, goes to Atlanta. They realize that it's sort of end of the road here with Matt Ryan, both for Ryan and for the Falcons themselves. And then somebody had to go to Arthur Smith and be like, okay, there's some quarterbacks available here. We could go first round draft pick. We could, go to the Baker Mayfield. We could go to the Jimmy G thing. Like Arthur Smith said, or at least I think he said, yeah, I had Marcus Mariota in Tennessee. Like, I can work with that. We'll grab a quarterback in the 2nd or 3rd round or whatever and, like, see how that goes. But we're also going to grab a quarterback who stylistically looks a lot like Marcus Mariota, right? Like, mobile quarterback, maybe not the strongest arm necessarily in the world, but should make good decisions and not turn the ball over a ton. Problem is with the Falcons, they don't have that Browns-like roster where the quarterback just has to be okay. But like the bar is so low for the Falcons at 4.5 wins, essentially a 4.75 when you look at the over being slightly juiced. Like, that's a 29. Like, they're a 29. Like, there's so much room for them to be better than a 29 for a team that won a decent amount of games last year. So yeah, like, I'll wait on this. I'll try to get 6. It's obviously not going to get to 7. I really don't think. But like, yeah, for the first game with Jameis and a lot of those weapons that I think gel and probably pretty good the rest of the way here, a nice +6 here for the Falcons would be absolutely something that I'm going to get on.
No, I got you. I got you there. Let's keep things moving here. We got the New England Patriots in Miami to take on the Dolphins. Dolphins 3.5-point favorites at home. The extra point, the extra half point, the hook, as they say, does have me a little nervous. But on the flip side, the Pats always struggle in Miami, no matter what, even when Tom Brady was there. And now we know Tom Brady is still not there. And they got Matt Patricia still calling plays, I think. But either way, it's like, either way. I'm not full on buying this like Dolphins parade and like the Tua hype and all that. And, Tyreek Hill, I think, will have an okay season, but I think they overpaid for him and all that fun stuff. But I think this is a year where the Dolphins just handle their business against the Patriots. So give me Miami and the 3.5 points. I don't love it, but I'm in on it.
Well, I'll tell you this. I mean, you're in line with somebody this week who has bumped this thing from 3 to 3.5 after it went, from 2.5 to 3, right? So we have cruised all the way through the key number here. And at that point, like, this is Patriots or nothing for me. And again, this comes down to week 1. Okay, a lot of these teams might be good by the time the season goes on. And like, we like that from a, again, higher end result type thing. You could sell me that by the end of the year, the Dolphins are really good. Maybe they even usurp the Bills and win the division. But in a week 1, like, I think this is based on home field advantage, but I've built 2.5 points for home field advantage here with the Dolphins because of the reasons that you just mentioned. The heat and whatnot always gives them quite literal advantage at home. But then that still means that the Dolphins are somewhere along the lines of like 56 and the Patriots are about a 50, with an 8.5 win total. That sort of makes some sense for the Patriots. But again, we're looking at making this assumption that the Dolphins are just good all of a sudden and like rookie head coach. And again, don't get me into the Tua people, but like, we still don't really know about Tua. And once you cruise past 3 and you're going to give me +3.5, I'm just going to take the Patriots. And I know people are, imagine hand wringing about the Patriots coaching staff. You know what I mean? Like, imagine being concerned about that. Like, doesn't that have like, Patriots 19-17 victory on week 1? And we all just looked around ourselves, and like, did we really like think Bill Belichick didn't have things tightened up? Around that facility? Like, it just, again, they might lose. Dolphins might win by a lot, but if you're going to give me 3.5 points, I'm taking the Patriots.
Yeah, I as I said, I don't love the fact that the line has gone from 2.5 to 3.5. Definitely do not like that at all. But, could be put that after the Chiefs game.
Yeah, we're gonna learn some hard lessons about closing line value and being on getting the best of the number, I think, after week 1 here.
Oh yes. And let's keep things moving. The Ravens 7-point favorites at the Jets. Lamar Jackson, I feel like, should have to come out here balling, especially with his contract situation still up in the air. And what better team to do that against than the Jets? But the one thing that is interesting to me, it's not even just Lamar Jackson. I feel like if the Ravens are fully healthy, they should be a pretty good team that is fighting for, some like top spots in the AFC.
Sure.
And the Jets are the Jets. I mean, Joe Flacco, wasn't he out here like his kids making fun of him, telling him he sucks? Like, I can't take the
Jets.
Might
not be wrong.
They might not be wrong. I mean, we're sitting here looking at it, and I know talked a lot about home dogs and all that, but I feel like different rules apply for the Jets. I don't like it at 7, but I'll take the 7 points in the Ravens.
Yeah, it's in like you're taking the Jets here with the 7
No,
points.
Sorry.
Oh, you're gonna give the
I'm
points
on the
with
Ravens.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm laying the points.
Okay.
Ravens
So
-7.
listen, my answer to that would be all right. You know what I mean? Like I'm not
Right?
gonna tell you like, oh, we
Yeah,
got to
yeah,
grab
yeah,
the points here with the Jets here because like this, let's do our ratings thing here. Let's say the Ravens. We're expecting a playoff team. We talked about how they're probably around the same level as the Bengals. I think the Ravens maybe a little bit better than the Bengals potentially based on their health this season. Let's call them a 64, right? Give them a 1 sort of point nudge, not even a point, in football terms, but from a rating standpoint, we'll give them a 64. Them being a 7-point favorite means the Jets are a 32. So, I mean, look at it this way, right? Like we're talking about these two teams like they're Chiefs Cardinals, or I should say that we're talking about Chiefs Cardinals like this is Ravens Jets. Like that doesn't really sort of add up, kind of going back to that Cardinals game. It adds up a lot better when you look and you say, yeah, Jets are about a 32 because the Jets are going to have to, and Joe Flacco especially, are going to have to prove to me that not only are they better than a 32, that they just even are a 32.
Exactly.
Right? But at 5.5, 5.75 essentially with a win total, like that's what they're being rated. And like, I'm not ready to get there here with this edition of the Jets. Like, there's nothing that says like Robert Saleh is like a great coach. Like, there's no side of the football or even positional group in a lot of ways where I'm like, yep, Jets have got it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the offensive line could be a lot better if they had some better sort of health luck in the last couple of years. But like, the line makes a ton of sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring up a little thing I like to call Survivor, because you mentioned that road favorite and all the home underdogs, like schedule makers not doing anybody any favors in Survivor this week, because you are left with some really dangerous, home picks. Like if you're looking we'll get to Tennessee here, but like Cincinnati, like you really want to go against the Steelers week 1 in Survivor. Like I don't really want to do that, but like a lot of people will tell you, and I have said this in the past, like I'm looking to only play home teams. Like I will take my chances with home teams, but as home field advantage has devalued over the years, that has to be less true, right? Or that has to be less of a thing that we sort of believe. And when it comes to betting, one of the cool things is we are given win probabilities before every game. Right? The money line is telling you what the likelihood of this team or that team is to win the game. And they've already factored in home field advantage, and they have factored all of that stuff in. And so when we look at this week where there's only a handful of 7-point favorites, to me, the Ravens are, again, I'll use the term safest play from a Survivor standpoint, because I know that the Jets are appropriately rated. I know in my head that the Ravens are appropriately rated. I can't say that about the Steelers. I can't say that about the Giants or the Titans. I can't say that about the Chiefs or the Cardinals, or even the Texans, which is another team that we'll get to here shortly. So like this to me is Ravens in Survivor. Don't worry about the point spread. And honestly, over the course of the rest of the season, there's not going to be a ton of other times to take the Ravens as a 7-point favorite. Yeah, I would prefer them playing at home, but that's already built into this line. If they were playing at home, we'd be looking at a 10, 11-point favorite, but they don't get the Jets at home. They get a bunch of division teams at home that are going to be tough. They get the Falcons in week 16. I'll spoil it for you. There's other teams that we can use in week 16 if we are lucky enough to get there. The Ravens are a Survivor play and nothing else for me this week.
Love it. Let's go with the Giants, who are on the road in Tennessee. Tennessee Titans are 5.5-point favorites. In the Vegas zone, super strange line to me. Give me the points. I just don't like being on Tennessee by that many points, even though it's the Giants. I know, and I get it, and I understand it. It's the Giants. This is not really even a bet. This is a bet on the Giants aren't, like, me thinking the Giants aren't that bad. They're not Jets bad. That's basically what this bet is.
It's funny. Like you go through the summer and you're looking at lines, and for me, I'll use this game's kind of a perfect example. I'm like, 6.5 for the Titans, and you sit there and you go, man, if we could get 7 with the Giants, we will be cooking with gas if we can get +7 with the Giants. And then one day somebody wakes up, and it's infuriating because whether it's a 2.5, something around 2.5, 3, something around 6.5, 7, you just go like, you really couldn't wait any longer to see if this could go to 7 before you put in the bet, the order, right? These conglomerates, if you will, that move these lines. You couldn't wait for a +7, and they couldn't. They had to grab +6.5 in like the middle of August. And they had to grab +6. And here we are down to 5.5. Now, the good news is, mid-June, we have a pretty good idea of what's going on when it comes to these point spreads and what the point spread should be. The fact that we know that +6.5 is good, and then a month later it goes down to 5.5, when, by the way, the Giants have done nothing to deserve this. Imagine if the Giants even had like an okay preseason, like where this line might go, where the Giants hype, because people were ready, man. They were ready to be Brian Daboll turning around Daniel Jones's career. Look at the trenches where they added an offensive line and they added a defensive line. This defense, they can do some things, blah, blah. Like Saquon's back. Like people were chomping at the bit, man, to like be in on the Giants, and they stunk in the preseason, and the line still went down under 6. So I don't know if we're ever going to see this 6 again. This is me sitting around waiting for a 6, even though I could have grabbed 6.5 earlier on in the off season. Would have loved to go back in time to do that. Was hoping we would get 7. Isn't going to happen, but at least we know that we're on the right track with some of these line moves.
I got you. Keep things moving here. We got the Niners, my Niners, 7-point favorites in Chicago against the Bears. I said it earlier, alluded to it earlier. It's trade day. Long time listeners will know I'm a Niners guy. Defense alone, the Niners should win this game. I feel like defense alone, the Niners should probably cover this game. But I'm very much more interested in seeing what Shanahan has for Trey Lance after a full year of being able to install the Trey Lance package that we were stating from last year. Clearly he wasn't ready for, because he had every opportunity to take it. But now you have a year. Here it is. I'm not thrown off by the Jimmy G thing being the backup. I just think that's a smart move for in case it doesn't work. So yeah, give me the Niners -7. I know it's a lot of points. I know we talked about home dogs and all that other fun stuff, but the Bears, I mean, I don't know what to make of the Bears. I think the Niners defense covers this.
Yeah, so this is very sort of poor man's version of Ravens Jets, right? Where the only problem here is a couple of things. One, I think the ratings are probably okay. Bears rated about a 29, which is like down with the Falcons, which is not quite as bad as the Seahawks, a little bit lower than the Lions, et cetera, et cetera. As far as comparing them with the Jets, it's like, yeah, like I know what I'm going to get from Joe Flacco.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know for sure what I'm getting from Justin Fields, because he has the mobile ability, and that, that extends a drive or two, and you only get like 10 drives in a game. And if you extend a couple of them, maybe into field goal range, or you score, well, now you might have something there. And on the flip side, the Ravens bring Lamar Jackson into New York. I know what I'm going to get with Lamar Jackson. I don't know necessarily what I'm going to get with Trey Lance. And you mentioned like the package last year. It's like, my problem was like, I wish they used him in the package a little bit more than they actually did, right?
Yeah.
Like, that was my main problem, is like, if you're going to use this guy, like, let's get that package out there rolling like all the time. So like, that was really bothersome for me. So like, yeah, they are like, if there's sort of a plan B, if you will, for Survivor, then like this would be a Niners, like the second choice for me. But I'm not looking to back them -7, but I'm also not really dying to grab the Bears at this point +7. Like
Exactly,
I have the 49ers rated pretty high, like a 69. Nice. Whereas we mentioned like the Bears being a 29, like that's how you get a 7-point road favorite.
Yeah.
There's just kind of a better chance that maybe the 49ers dip a little bit. Like, yeah, there is some room above, but like Trey Lance has to be really good for that to happen. So it is sort of this like tread a little bit more lightly than you would with the Ravens and the Jets. And so, I'm in, I don't do the -7 on the road literally maybe ever. And so I'm not about to now, but it's not like I'm dying to bet the Bears here either.
I gotcha. We'll continue to pick things up and finish off a little quick here as we got the Jags at the Commanders. Commanders are 2.5-point favorites, and I'm not taking Carson Wentz and the Commanders to be favored against anybody. I know that last year, I know I'm going overboard here. I know that last year there's a very similar situation with the Jags early on in the season where they were underdogs against someone and everyone was on the wave of taking the Jags. I can't remember who it was, but I feel
No,
like
they
it
were
must have been
favorites. They
oh,
were
they were
minus
favorites
3.5
against the
favorites at
Texans.
the Texans. And it was like,
That's what it
what on
was.
earth
Yeah,
did the
yeah.
Jags do to deserve this?
That's what it
And
was.
sure
My
enough, the
bad.
Texans won on the money line. That was one of the great
So
week
now
one plays from
so
last
now
year.
let's flip things around here.
Yeah.
And I was on the right trail. I was just in the right area, just wrong. Anyways, Jaguars, give me the Jags plus 2.5 against the Commanders and your man's Carson Wentz. There's not much more that I want to add to that. I mean, hey, they got Trevor Lawrence. You'd hope that he has a much better season than he did last year without Mr. Urban Meyer in the way. So let's go.
Yeah. So if there's one thing to this this theme to this podcast, it'd be you're on the right track, but like we should have had this podcast a month ago, right? Because
Exactly. Yeah.
when this was Jags plus 3.5 for a really
Mhm.
long time. It was even open for way long time, a long time ago. But like now it's down to 2.5, and it's the same thing with the Cardinals Chiefs. It's the same thing with some of these other ones where you're, especially across the key numbers here
Mhm.
of 3 and even to a lesser extent 4 through 6 with regards to the Chiefs game. You can't bet the Jaguars plus 2.5 here, man. Like you just cannot do it. Like
Yeah.
under no circumstances I throw my body in front of it type of a deal here. And in fact, like once now that we're down to minus 2.5, like I think this is a Commanders bet. Like again, what have the Jags done to deserve all of this? Right?
Totally
Like
true.
they're just one Hard Knocks season away from just being over, in the same boat as the Lions at this point,
Mhm.
right? Like but again, I get 3.5, like taking those points against, Carson Wentz and the Commanders, whatever. But like Ron Rivera is no disaster when it comes to, head coaching. Like Carson Wentz can be infuriating, but at least he's got some level of talent, and he certainly has some talent around him. And, part of that line move may have come from Chase Young's suspension earlier on, but like for this to go to 3 to 2.5, like, if you're listening to this trying to make a decision on a bet here, like, you're obviously decided that you're going to pick every game as you have over the last couple of years. And so like the last thing you're going to want to do here is like go, okay, fine, I'll take the Commanders and then watch the Jags win outright. But like from an actual betting standpoint, like you can't take the Jaguars plus 2.5. You cannot do it. Like they have not done anything to prove that they know what they're doing because they hired Doug Peterson. Like if he was such a great coach, he would still be the coach of the Eagles. You know what I mean? Like they ran that guy out on a rail because like they tried to lose a football game. So like I'm sorry, like Doug Peterson, cool. Like he won kind of miracle-ish Super Bowl, but like he's not the one that's going to turn this thing around. And like, yeah, I'm sorry, Trevor Lawrence has to take some blame for not being good last year.
Yeah.
That can't all be, as much as we all want and dislike Urban Meyer, like that can't all be on Urban Meyer's shoulders and the general disaster that was. Like, yeah, maybe he ends up being really good, but like he also built his entire reputation being on teams that had way more talent than his opponent. That has never been the case for the Jaguars, and frankly, probably never will be the case for the Jaguars. And all the Jaguars have actually done is overpay some mediocre wide receivers, overpay and not really make any commitment to their offensive line beyond I'm not going to say washed up. That's not fair, but like a veteran guard. They haven't made any changes to the offensive tackle position from last season. So Trevor Lawrence still might be good, just be getting destroyed all the time because of the lack of offensive line play. And like these receivers and like Travis Etienne's back, and it's like, okay, but since when did we start making decisions based on running backs, right?
Yeah.
Who also made his name on a team that played other teams that didn't have the same level of talent as his own team. And defensively, they had the first pick overall, and they picked a guy who we don't expect to have a ton of impact from a counting stat standpoint. right? Like, this isn't like a massive overhaul in the way that, like, oh, look at all the talent the Jags have brought in. They've just spent a lot of money and grabbed a guy who won a Super Bowl a few years back with Nick Foles. Like, that was kind of crazy, but like, what? Like, how are we rating the Jags the way that we are here off of kind of not really anything just yet?
No. I got you. Very interesting game to see, like, because one of the other sides of how I like to pick against games is seeing like who the real crappy teams are in the league. And I think this will be an interesting matchup to see which one of these two teams are that contender to just, initially start with the fade each and every week. Keeping things moving, the Colts are 7-point favorites in Houston. And the Texans, I think for a lot of people, foolishly were a team that people tried to just fade last year. But really, the Texans were a better than you would think team against the spread last year because they faced a lot of double-digit spread. So they wouldn't win, but they could keep things, respectable, I guess that is the right way to put it. Yeah.
They won 4 games. You know what I mean?
Right?
Like,
yeah.
That's outrageous. I love the Texans, man. I do. Like, I've been just pushing it off. I finally had to admit, like, last week, I was like, you know what, folks, I just do. And it's not to like do anything crazy. I don't think they're gonna make the playoffs or anything like that, right? But like, fundamentally, I believe at the very core, football is played in the trenches. And like, if you have a good offensive line, like, that's a pretty good start. And the Texans don't have a particularly good defensive line. That would be sort of the next step of the program. But like, they didn't have an opportunity to get one of the top 2 or allegedly top 2 defensive linemen in the draft last year. And so they just had to settle, if you will, for maybe an all-pro level cornerback, right? And like, that's a start as well. And so, Derek Stingley Jr. should be pretty good defensively. But fundamentally, this comes down to the offensive line not getting to play together last year when Laramie Tunsil went out like week 5 with, I think it was like broken hand. And then they go and they, first round pick, use that on, was his name, forget the gentleman's name, Zion Johnson, something like that. Anyway, they use another, a first round pick on another offensive lineman. They are building this line out. Tunsil will be back this season and hopefully he stays healthy. And then you watch them play in the preseason and like, Dameon Pierce looks really good. And again, we don't make decisions here based on running backs, but like, that's certainly better than like the poo-poo platter they were running like last year with like Rex Burkhead and like these other just washed up dudes. Like, Dameon Pierce was underused at Florida, like our guy Anthony Richardson, by the way. Shout out to him for an incredible performance on last Saturday when you and I were discussing his potential last season for Florida. Only Dan Mullen ruined that. Imagine having Anthony Richardson and Dameon Pierce on your roster and you just don't really use them all that well. But the point is here is like, Davis Mills is potentially a really good quarterback. And because the first time we saw him was a Thursday night game where he was sort of thrown in to, play. And like, I think it was the 3rd game of the season of his rookie year. Like, he wasn't going to look very good. Right. And he sort of has the long neck, doesn't like look overly mobile thing where it's like, you can't even make anything out of nothing. You're just going to get what you get in that sort of a situation. But he got really good towards the end of the season. Right. And he was hitting overs hand over fist on his passing yardage, which, we were on top of over in our little corner of the internet. And so like, I like the quarterback. I like the offensive line. I like the running back. I like Brandon Cooks with Davis Mills. Like, they had a connection.
They did.
And so it's like, they might be able to score a little bit. Now, I don't know about the defense. Maybe Stingley's awesome and they get to just put him on somebody and forget about it and they can play 10 on 10 the rest of the field. Like, that'd be really cool. But like, speaking of your guy, Shanny and the 49ers, like, Lovie Smith has a better all-time record as an NFL coach than your man Shanny. Like, so as much as we make fun of Lovie Smith and like how bad, it was at Illinois and like a lot of that is recruiting, there's no recruiting in the NFL. Lovie Smith might be just a pretty good coach. You know what I mean? He might be better than the guy last year, and the guy last year won 4 games. So I think the Texans go over their win total. I think they're scrappy as hell this season. And again, we talked about this with the Giants and the Titans, and the Giants didn't even do anything to sort of deserve, the line move. Like, I was loving the Texans at +8, and we saw yesterday the line move to +7. Somebody else out there likes the Texans. And I don't even know if that's appropriate based on ratings, because I think the Colts are going to be a really good team and rated really high.
Yeah.
And the Texans still have to show us something. But at least sort of perceptively, like, that felt like too many points. And sure enough, it was, because that one line is down to 7, having been at 8 all summer long.
Yeah. No, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. The Texans, it's so funny. It was one of those things where I kept trying to tell people all last year, I'm like, I know you think they suck, but look up their record against the spread. And that's what we're doing. We're making picks against the spread. Right. So anyways, if you know, I guess, type of thing there. Keep things moving. The Sunday nighter, your man's Tom Brady, 2.5-point favorites in Dallas against the Cowboys. I want nothing to do with the Dallas Cowboys more than ever this year. I feel like, I know that they do have the talent. They always have talent. They still have talent in the skills positions. I know it's not as bad as people want to make it. I just think that this Mike McCarthy thing has to come to an end at some point.
Yeah.
And does he make it through the whole season? Like, while Sean Payton's on TV, just like waiting in the wings, like it's all just weird. Right. And the whole thing with Dan Quinn, that's his defensive coach, that was basically said that he went to McCarthy and said, hey, like, would this be better for you if I resigned? Because that's how much talk was going into the season about Mike McCarthy being replaced. Like, there's just so much crap going on. Mind you, there's a lot of crap going on with the Bucs as well, which man's Tom Brady fighting himself in the gossip columns all again, and all that stuff going on as well. Totally understand it. Totally get it. Do I like taking the Bucs on the road as favorites? Not really. But this is more of a fade of the Cowboys early, because I think for the Cowboys, it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, this is as tricky as the game there is this week, man. Yeah, it really is, right? Because you have to sort of stick with the Buccaneers from a rating of last year, which would be around a 75, right? Like a contender to win the Super Bowl. And that's starting really high, right? Like, it kind of can only go down from here, or at least stay where it is. And so if that's the case, then they're 2.5-point favorites on the road to Dallas. And that means sort of translating that. Okay, well, what would the Cowboys rating be? Well, the Cowboys rating would be about a 55, right? And so, I could get to 55 with Dallas, like on the downside there, because Tyron Smith is out and because, Amari Cooper gets traded, and honestly, just Jerry Jones saying that, like, they go as Ezekiel Elliott goes, like, that's enough for me. But then from a numerical, like, numbers standpoint, we look at the defense being, like, really, really lucky last year. Trayvon Diggs, think about it this way, by the way, a little bit of a tangent, but like, Trayvon Diggs had 11 interceptions and didn't even sniff Defensive Player of the Year. Yeah. So, like, if you were ever thinking, I've retired from even trying to bet anyone other than a defensive lineman for Defensive Player of the Year, right? We've just come too far. We know too much. Trayvon Diggs is running touchdowns back, left, right, and center, and he can't even get a sniff. But the point is, he's not going to do that again. They're not going to get the Dallas Cowboys. Little trivia for people who don't read my stuff. Can't imagine why you wouldn't read everything I write. But the Dallas Cowboys led the league in points last year. Like, it probably would have taken you a while if I had asked you, again, week 1, I'm being easy on you here with the questions. Wait for week 2 when I've got all kinds of stuff prepared for you, Shell. But, like, if I asked you how many points, who had the most points in the NFL last year, it's probably a 6th or 7th by the time you guess the Dallas Cowboys. And so part of that is because the defense is turning teams over and getting touchdowns on returns. They're not going to get that stuff too, right? And so if we call the Cowboys a playoff team, which they obviously were last year, right, we assign them sort of a low 60s rating. Well, if we expect this year for that to drop, then 55 starts to make a little bit more sense.
Yeah.
That being said, like, we're making that assumption with the Bucs rating at 75. We're at least making an assumption of status quo, where it's might get worse. The Cowboys, we're making an assumption that it's worse. And so I think you have to look to the Cowboys in this game, because of obviously the point spread and the rating element being like, well, like, maybe the Cowboys just are still a 60, and 55 is too far at this point. Now, I'm not dying to bet them plus 2.5. Maybe by the time Sunday night rolls around, we get a little old school situation where on Sunday night, everybody just piles in on the quote unquote, in this case, America's team would be the Buccaneers, strangely enough, right? Being that like more popular team, the classic road dog situation. Like, yeah, I'll take the Cowboys if we can get to 3. Otherwise, it turns into like a hang on to your butt teaser, Thursday, Sunday night teaser with the Cowboys plus 8.5 and the Rams plus 8.5. And you just kind of ride with that at minus 120 or better on a 6-point teaser and hope the weekend starts and finishes the right way from a teaser standpoint.
I like it. It's super interesting. The Dallas Cowboys, always entertaining for sure. Probably wishing he was as entertaining as whatever's going on with the Cowboys, but he tries. Is your man's Russell Wilson, who now finds himself as a QB of the Denver Broncos, and they get the Monday night spot. Broncos at Seahawks. Broncos favored by 6.5 points. I almost am going to forbid myself from watching this game because I do not like, it'll just be a lot of Russell Wilson, and I'm never here for a lot of Russell Wilson. Like I just can't do it. Right. But in terms of this spread, I feel like 6.5 points is a lot. I don't think the Seahawks are going to be very good, but I do feel like the Seahawks in a Monday night game, home crowd, Russ might be trying to do a little bit too much.
Yeah.
6.5 points is a lot. I'm leaning Seahawks plus the points here.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like something that could get to 7 by the time anybody even really thinks about this game come Monday, right? Like, it's not something you're dying to bet
for sure.
And then at plus 7, you're like, okay, fine, like you win, take my money. I mean, I think like pretty much. Yeah, I think that's kind of it when it comes to that, because again, my assumption is that the Seahawks are going to be really, really bad. And like, I think that's kind of the point to them this year, right? And like, Carroll is going to be just the steward of badness, right? He's going to lead them into sort of like respectably be the worst team in the league potentially, or like, down there somewhere where they'll have a handful of quarterbacks to choose from, whether it's, Stroud, Young, or even the aforementioned Anthony Richardson. Like, there's going to be, it should be a pretty interesting crop this year in the NFL draft, unlike last year. And so there isn't really any motivation to try to be good, because honestly, you have to look around in Seattle and be like, there just isn't much here, right? From a roster standpoint. So, good for them for not trading for Jimmy G and then just kind of like going down here with the ship, so to speak. I've got them rated here, for using this point spread about a 27. That puts the Broncos up in the, 27. It's legitimately funny. That puts the Broncos up in that Chargers, Chiefs. Well, not quite the Chiefs, but the Chargers range of like 65, 66, 67, something along those lines, right? And just the fact that the Chargers and Broncos are sort of rated that way, sort of shows like, are those teams really that much worse than the Chiefs? And we already decided, right, that the Chiefs are being rated right now at about a 75 or a 76. So again, all of this is just circling back to that Cardinals-Chiefs game, like just blowing my mind on that point spread, right? Like, maybe the Broncos, Chargers, and Chiefs, maybe all of them are 75s this year. Maybe it's just an absolute sweepstakes in the AFC East, or AFC West, of really, really good teams. And we just don't see that very, that often. We may not even really know about that until the playoffs roll around. But yeah, like, it's situational in its entirety, because like, people do the thing where like, well, this guy's going to want to do this and this guy's going to want to do that. It's like, it's an NFL football field, man. Guys are out there just trying to survive, right? Like, the effort is there. That's what's cool about the NFL. There's no like off nights as far as effort is concerned. You're going to have the 52 or whatever guys on the Seahawks putting in the effort against their former quarterback, whereas you only have one former Seahawk on the other side for the Broncos. I think the Broncos probably still win this game, but like you said, if we get to 7, I think you got to take the Seahawks and just absolutely hate your life for 4 hours on Monday night.
Yeah, I plan on not watching this game, but taking the Seahawks in the 6.5. So here we are. I know because it's week 1, we'll go super, super long here, but we'll just ask a couple questions here. I would like to know, first off, I have 3 questions for you.
Okay.
We'll start with NFL MVP.
Sure.
Who is your pick?
So again, this is all,
say.
This is all obviously odds based or whatever, right? Because I mean,
you
got Josh Allen the favorite, right? But I'm like, I don't know that I can't remember a time necessarily where a guy was a favorite without actually getting any sort of votes in recent memory, right? So, that's not something that I can play. And I wrote a column earlier on in the off season, and it was like grab Wilson, grab Jackson, and grab Herbert, because their odds are going to get shorter, and they did. And so we sort of have that in pocket, which goes, okay, if those guys' odds get shorter, whose odds get longer? And the one guy that sort of jumped out to me is Patrick Mahomes, because the bar that we set for Patrick Mahomes after his like 50 bajillion, touchdown, 5,000 trillion yard season where he won the MVP, like we set that bar so high for that dude. And all that he did was like throw for like 4,500 yards and like 40 some odd touchdowns and like lead the team to like the AFC title game. And, in one case, like a Super Bowl appearance. And like, oh yeah, of course he did. Like he's got, Kelsey and Hill, and like that's what they do. And like, okay, Rodgers was doing it, perceived to be doing it with less, right? Doesn't this feel like Mahomes now has the perception with Hill being gone that if he does it, i.e. like 5,000 yards and close to 50 touchdowns, it's going to be like, man, he didn't even need Tyreek Hill. Like that's how good, the Chiefs are. And from a team perspective, part of it in the past was, well, the AFC West, like the Broncos are a mess, the Raiders are a train wreck, and the Chargers can't get out of their way. Of course, the Chiefs had a really good record. Well, now, as we've talked about throughout this last 2 hours, is a lot of regard for everyone in the AFC West. So a Chiefs division is all of a sudden more impressive because they're not minus 400 to win the division. They're only plus 150 to win the division from an odd standpoint. And he does it without Tyreek Hill. So like all of a sudden, the bar is now lowered for Mahomes. He only had, instead of having to jump the bar here, he has to jump the bar a little bit lower. And so that makes him more capable of doing that, which makes his odds, which haven't really changed from years to year. It's actually a little bit longer. 9-1 right now is longer than the 6 or 7-1 that it has been in the past. Like the odds are as long as they're going to get. We're not going to get Patrick Mahomes 20-1. I'm sorry, folks. It's just not going to happen. But if he ends up having a nice season, wins a really tough division, and puts up the stats that we expect him to, throwing to a lot of different guys instead of just the main 2 guys that he has been in the past, 9-1 is going to feel pretty good come that ceremony right before the Super Bowl in February.
I love it. I love it. And my last question for you as we round out this week 1 NFL extravaganza. Super Bowl picks, please, my friend.
I thought there were 2 more questions coming. I thought there were 3 total questions.
Well, in theory, do you know what it was? Because as I was talking about it, I was like thinking, who's going to win the AFC? Who's going to win the NFC? And then the Super Bowl. But by just asking the Super Bowl pick, just combined it. You know what I mean? That's what happened.
Well, okay.
Good catch by you.
So same sort of deal, though, with the MVP, right? Where you go, all right, like, I get it. Tampa Bay, Buffalo, they're the favorites. Blah, blah, blah. If you want to go to ESPN and get the Tampa Bay Buffalo Super Bowl pick, like, go for it, right? Not what we do here. But fundamentally, I've got 2 teams in each conference that I'm betting on that I think have a legitimate path for legitimate odds that could make this happen. And we've talked about them, obviously, because we just talked about every single team. So the NFC, it's the Vikings and it's the Saints. Both teams can be had around 15-1, and their only quote-unquote hurdle, given the fact that they have 2 teams in their division that are not very good, and I don't expect to be very good, their only hurdle is pretty beatable teams in Tampa Bay and Green Bay that have taken a hit to their talent level, if you will, whether it's offensive line injuries for Tampa or obviously Devontae Adams leaving. And by the way, not to go unmentioned, right? Zadarius Smith going from the Packers to the Vikings, obviously a big time flip there from a talent standpoint. So those 2 teams just have to, again, get past those 2 opponents in their division. If they are better than those 2 teams, probably means like a 13-win season. And a 13-win season could mean first seed in the NFC, and at that point you have good value. Probably worth mentioning, this is less about Super Bowl pick as it is who to make the Super Bowl, because as you and I have talked about in the past, what are you going to do if you get a Super Bowl bet in and then you get to the Super Bowl and your team is in that Super Bowl, you are going to talk yourself in to a dumb hedge. You are going to give back all of the equity that you earned from making that pick. You're going to give back a lot of the value that you earned for making that pick, especially if your team isn't favored in the Super Bowl, which, again, if you're going for a middle to long shot here, your team probably isn't going to be favored to win the Super Bowl. So don't bet the Super Bowl, bet the AFC and NFC conference championships. So Saints and Vikings in the NFC. In the AFC, we haven't talked a ton about this team because I was glowing about the Houston Texans in week 1, but the Indianapolis Colts, they have as good a chance as any to get that number 1 seed in the AFC. Because if you look at the good teams in the AFC North and you look at the good teams in the AFC West, and honestly, if you think the Dolphins are pretty good this year, and if you think Bill Belichick's doing things with the Patriots here, there's probably 3 really good teams in the AFC East, and they all may just cannibalize each other, right?
Yeah.
They all might just take wins off each other, and there just might be a bunch of 10-win teams. Meanwhile, you've got the Colts just sauntering in with maybe a down Titans team in that division, and then the Jags and the Texans being okay but not great. You could stack up some serious wins if you're the Colts, right? And now all of a sudden the Colts might be a 13-win team, get that first seed in the AFC, which, by the way, they literally saw their division rival do last year in the Titans. Again, it's another situation. Can the Colts replace the Titans? I think they can, in the same way that I think either the Vikings could replace the Packers and or the Saints could replace the Buccaneers, right? That's how you have to look at it. And then the last one is, and this one is a little bit of a departure from the idea of can you get the 1 seed in the conference? The Baltimore Ravens, right? So much happened last year, too much talent, too well coached for that team, who, by the way, like came so close to actually making the playoffs despite having their roster completely ravaged defensively from back to front, offensively from middle out. All of that was such a mess for the Ravens. They don't have to win the division even to be dangerous come the playoffs. If they are great in the regular season and they get the first seed, that's awesome. But even if they have to go on the road, or even if they're like the 3rd seed or something along those lines, right? Like that's a team that I still think can travel, so to speak, in the playoffs. And we're getting a pretty good price on them there at double digits to win the AFC. So 2 on one side, 2 on the other. Hopefully one of those 2 meet up. Maybe they, all meet up in the second round and we're actually in a really, really good spot in the second round of the playoffs. But certainly it would be really, really cool if they made it to the conference championship. Obviously, that means no one from the AFC West makes it. The Bucs don't make it. The Packers don't make it. But honestly, all of those teams are single digits to make it to the Super Bowl, and there's just no value there for me.
Okay. I like it. I like it a lot. Thanks again for coming through. This has been so much fun, and it just gets me super hyped up because we are at that time of the year where the NFL just takes over our lives for the next, all the way through February. So this will be fun to do each and every week. We will get the pods out on Thursdays. That is what we will do each and every Thursday. You can catch this pod as we will go through and make picks, and Matt will talk me out of picks. That's how we'll go. So when the picks are bad, don't yell at Matt, yell at me. Okay. That's
if the picks are bad.
But to get the really good info, because there's some legitimate info that you can get here from Matt, who by trade is writing about all the bets that you should be making and making us all a whole lot of money. Mr. Russell, where can the people find you?
Yeah, can I do 2 quick shout outs first before we do the plug at the end of the show? I want to do a couple of shout outs here. Shout out number 1 is to DRF. We haven't mentioned them as far as being on this podcast, but like if you're listening to this, you probably heard us on the DRF podcast, and if you started from day 1 on the DRF podcast, you probably listened to us back on this channel, on my channel, The Window. But shout out to them for giving us a platform for a year, 87, 89, 90 some odd episodes or whatever that we did with them. Great group over there. They obviously have gone a different route as far as like being Iowa centric. So best of luck to them going forward. Neither Shell nor I live in Iowa or know that much about Iowa sports. we move on and whatnot. But the other shout is obviously to the people listening to this, because there's a decent chance, outside of the fact that, like, and I said this to you when we talked recently, if we didn't do this podcast, it probably meant that we didn't get to talk about the NFL for an hour each week with each other, just because the way, life works and that sort of thing. Like, we probably do calls every couple of weeks or something like that. So, like, you and I are like, yeah, let's just do the podcast. But we also did it because, like, we got messages on, DMs and stuff and tweets and stuff being like, yo, what's going on with the podcast? Are you guys doing a podcast and whatever? I don't know, we might have let it go by the wayside if we didn't get those messages. And so in turn, this is also sort of a, mention to people, like, the popularity, so to speak, of the podcast wasn't anything, we wouldn't do the show. So we need your help as well to, like, make it more popular, because obviously, like, the more popular it gets, the more episodes that we would want to do. And part of the reason why we did 2 episodes per week for DRF is because we were contracted to. Like, we're going to do 1 a week this year because we're not contracted to. But if we had a sponsor, if we had something along those lines, then we would do more podcasts. So just worth mentioning, like, shout out to the people who listen to the show. Shout out to the people who are willing to tweet publicly about this show and to us and ask us questions and all of that sort of thing, because that's what brings us back to do it. And that's what spreads the word, so to speak. And spreading the word helps the show survive and, keep us bringing you, hopefully, what's been entertaining and hopefully, intellectually stimulating when it comes to sports betting along the way. So all of that, thanks to everybody out there for that. Wanted to get that out there because I know people sort of wondering about, all of that stuff. As for my stuff, if you don't know by now, at @MRussAuthentic on Twitter and the Score app, I've moved into more of a lead analyst role when it comes to the sports betting section. Set your alerts, come through the bet section on the Score. You don't have to live in Canada. You don't have to live in Ontario to get access to all of the stuff that I write. You can take that stuff to your book or books that you use on a regular basis. So that everything I write over there gets retweeted through @MRussAuthentic. But of course, you can follow the Score Bet as well and set your alerts in your Score app for betting news. And that'll help you get stuff immediately when it comes out so that you can grab stuff before the lines move. Because, one thing that we are really good at doing is noting closing line value or line value before it closes, so to speak. So all that's available over at the Score.
Yes. I mean, this is pretty huge too. I think that it's just another good sign that we're able to do this again for another year and have a whole lot more fun discussing the NFL and everything else that, we love to do here. So we will be back next week for sure to discuss more and more and more NFL football because, it's just that time of year. It's what we do. So I'd like to thank you guys and thank Matt for coming through again on this, the On Blast podcast. That wraps up week 1 of what we do here. And we will be back again next week. Until next time, I don't remember how I used to end this podcast when it used to be on this feed, because I know that there was a thing that I used to say at the end of the DRF one, and then there's something else that I used to say when it was the end of the Oblast pod.
For
times like this to rhyme like this. Yes, go. I like it. Whoa, yes, thank you for that. Yeah, it's been that long since. You know why? It's because the only ones I still do on this feed has been the You Killed It pod for a while, and that has its own ending. But yes, the On Blast podcast. He used to pray for times like this to rhyme like this. This is the On Blast podcast. Yes, NFL week 1, NFL picks, part of the On Blast podcast network. Until next time, see ya.